I'm here today in the Saxon Gardens at the heart of Warsaw. Since 1727, a public garden, one of the first in Europe. But it started life as something more, the garden of a palace built by the first Saxon king of Poland, Augustus II. A member of the Wettin dynasty from Saxony became kings of Poland. Why were they here? What were they doing? Why did they build this palace? And what is more, what is a Saxon axis? An exercise in urban planning. Join me in Poland Daily History today when we find out more. So Peter, we've now come to the Saxon Garden. We're starting our journey at the back of what would have been the colonnade of the old palace. We'll come back to that later. And now we're going to work our way through the garden.
Exactly. So we're going to walk along the main alley of the Saxon Garden, and we're going to see around the remnants of actually the sculptures which were designed along the main alley of the garden. Already at the time of the late reign of August II and early reign of August III, so two Wettins. And they were actually designed, those sculptures, also under the tutelage of the most skillful artist in Warsaw then. And one of them was Plersch, who was responsible for many sculptures that we've seen even on the facade of the Visitation Church next to the main Krakowskie Przedmieście alley.
And originally, I think there were, in its greatest extent, some 70 statues in this part of the garden.
Yes. So there were the main baroque rococo palace, and at the back there were 70 statues. 70 statues which used to be the allegories of different sciences, of different god and goddesses, Greek and Roman, and symbols of architecture, of painting, and so on and so on. So to show the whole complexity of culture and mythology and all those contexts.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And those 70 sculptures used to be here initially, but after the demolition in 1794, after the war, during the war in the defense of the Constitution of 3rd of May, actually some of them were taken to St. Petersburg by Russians.
General Surov, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And about 30 of them, like about 20-something of them, they left here in the garden, and some of them preserved even through the 19th century and even through the Second World War.
So some of these are original?
Yeah. Some of them which were closer to the palace at the back, actually, when the palace was blown up in 1944, they were destroyed.
Right.
But some of them were still standing here, and after war renovation, then came back here. But actually, for many of those sculptures, more dangerous was even the reconstruction works or maintenance works in 19th century, because they covered in a color oil paint, and it's crumbled beneath.
Yes, it's not good. Our masonry has to be left to breathe.
Exactly. But so some of them needs to be redone after they were quite hard. Yeah.
Okay.
But some of them stayed almost untouched, and one of the best preserved is actually Flora that you can see here. So the symbol of blossoming, of course, and a spring mythological sign.
This is one of the very original ones.
Very original one, probably even under the tutelage of Plersch workshop, at least. Yeah, and you can see something which is very characteristic for this Rococo style. So you have this, of course, the statue, which is still more in a baroque style, in this very dynamic pose. But you have this rococo cloth, which is very angular. Yeah? And sometimes I even have an impression that if you take out those clothes, it can begin even separately, kind of separate sculptures, you know, more like, more maybe...
Well, that's interesting, a sort of mixture of styles.
Yeah, yeah.
And would it have been in this position, or is that just too much to hope for? And is this the position of which that's that, or is that actually?
We can say for sure they were replaced later on. Yes, so so actually most of those sculptures were in around 1950, after World War II, when they were organizing the garden again. They placed it in a different positions, and they are placed now kind of randomly. So it's not showing the original plan of Poppelman and Neumann, so two main architects.
But it's marvelous that some of them actually survived. That these are the original. We can see it, as Augustus II might have seen it as well. I mean, that's actually, and I mentioned it quite a lot on these programs. But this idea of living history, this idea of walking the footsteps or seeing or touching something which these characters from history themselves saw, is, I think, a remarkable way of realizing that really history is a continuum. It either sort of never stops. We're part of it all the time. And this is, I think, something which makes you stop and think that your place in the world is, you're part of history as well. You don't have to be a king or a queen to be part of it. It's fantastic. We're just walking now past this marvelous fountain by Marconi, 19th century.
19th century, mid-19th century, actually 1850s, 1855, when it was opened and designed by Henryk Marconi, so one of the best architects of the mid-19th century in Warsaw, whose roots were in Warsaw, but it became Warsaw, like in Italy, of course, but it became Warsaw family later on. And it was designed here and opened here when the water pipe systems designed by Marconi was actually built in the middle of the city.
It's a splendid. There's something about the movement of water, which is just very relaxing, particularly on a hot day in a park. And these fountains are splendid. Really, it brings life to the place. I think it's the grandest fountain we have in Warsaw. I can't think of a better one.
Yeah, actually it is shown even on the many photographs from 19th century. Usually the palace was photographed from the back, from the garden side, with the people which were walking around, because it was always a public garden, almost from the scratch.
1727,
And so it was one of the favorite gardens to the people of Warsaw to walk through and to enjoy also. So we have those people with the 19th century clothes, the fountain and its back, and the huge colonnade of the 19th century shape of the main palace. And by the way, this solar clock is also original disc from 19th century. It's also tracing back to the 1860s. Yeah, it was founded by one of the most famous historians of Warsaw, actually, Magyar, whose name was Magyar. Actually, you can see his name is carved, even here. Yeah.
1863.
Just in front of the main fountain. So it's kind of redevelopment of the garden in 19th century. Because we need to remember that actually original garden, which used to be in the Saxon times, wasn't the garden that looked like nowadays, like with trees. No. But we have only the parterres of floral
these very elaborate flower beds. Very typically, you see a lot in French chateaus.
French, Italian,
Baroque. I don't think it really ever caught on very much in British architecture, but certainly very classic French, very elaborate. Not much of it left today, of course. There's a little bit behind the other side of the fountain to give us an idea of what it might have looked like. But then, of course, we now have what would be a slight reproduction of that more 19th century, that more natural
Yeah.
parkland type setting, slightly
Landscape
wild.
park.
Yeah, slightly you let nature sort of design its own landscape to a certain extent.